Welcome back to Bitcoin is Hard, a Choice App production. I'm your host, Brian Harrington, and we're here at the Riot offices, Southern California, with CEO, man himself, Jason Les.
Good to see you, Brian.
What's up, man? Yes, great to see you. This is Christmas holiday themed because today is the launch of SAT Center, and SAT Center is launching at the Southern California, the Orange County Bitcoin Network meetup. Invited all the other meetups across California, Arizona, and Nevada to our Christmas party. Last year we got 2 meetups together. This year we have like 9 or 10 or 11 meetups that are coming together, and yeah, we decided to launch SAT Center, which is an organization that is dedicated to educating local and state level leaders about Bitcoin. So that's what's happening tonight. That's the reason for the Christmas tree. But what we're gonna do right now, we're just gonna find out more about Riot. So tell us from the top level, what does Riot do?
Riot is a Bitcoin company. We are a company in our culture, the people we have, we are huge believers in Bitcoin and the implications it has for the future of all society. So we are interested in increasing our exposure to Bitcoin. We do that through mining. We are experts. We've developed infrastructure, expertise, and technology to make us the most efficient Bitcoin miner possible. Now, how does that tie into accumulating Bitcoin? The way Bitcoin mining works is if your costs are low enough, if you are, once again, an efficient operator of Bitcoin mining, you are essentially, I should say effectively, purchasing Bitcoin at a discount to market when you mine. So that is the tool that we are using to increase our exposure to Bitcoin. We are taking dollars, we are spending those on capital expenses to drive a mining operation. We're using those to pay for the operational expense of a mining operation. And out of that, we are extracting Bitcoin. We've been growing our Bitcoin balance, particularly this year, quite a lot. And we feel the more Bitcoin we hold, the better.
What is it like being a CEO, and a CEO of a Bitcoin company?
Well, the Bitcoin part is particularly important to me. I was involved and committed my life to Bitcoin long before Riot. I knew Bitcoin was the future. I knew I wanted to be involved in Bitcoin. I actually had no aspirations to even work. I just wanted to, I wanted to do software engineering relative to Bitcoin, and I wanted to mine. And that's all I wanted to do, and read blog posts about Bitcoin and listen to podcasts. And, life works in funny ways, but my commitment to this space led me to this position in Riot. So as CEO, as a Bitcoiner who's CEO, I feel incredibly lucky because my entire job is focused around trying to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. That's what I believe our shareholders want, and that's what I'm tasked to provide. So not only am I driven to create this successful company, I'm driven to create a company that's executing on a mission that I feel is entirely transformative, something really hard to compare to any point in human history. So I feel incredibly excited and lucky to be a part of this.
Yeah, no, for sure. Talk more about the accumulation strategy, because something we're trying to do on Bitcoin is Hard, and something I'm trying to do with this podcast and the spaces that we're doing routinely throughout the week is I want to see more content around Bitcoin paired with personal finances. And I want to get more in the weeds with people on at a company level, but also at a personal level, we're living in transitionary times, and it feels like the whole world is coming to grasps with what is Bitcoin, how do you budget Bitcoin, should I be being paid in Bitcoin, what is it an asset, is it a currency? People ask this question of just what is it all the time. Go farther into your accumulation strategy. How does Riot, the company, think about that?
I think, our strategy for 2021, our strategy for a while has been to mine Bitcoin and accumulate Bitcoin. Over 2021, we have not sold any of the Bitcoin we've mined through our recent disclosures. We have retained all that Bitcoin, so we haven't sold it to pay any type of expenses. So that's kind of interesting because you have one side of the business, the input to the business is fiat dollars, and the output is Bitcoin. And when you're not selling any, you're kind of looking at the two things completely distinct. It's really like a box that's converting dollars to Bitcoin.
Yep.
So, I think that kind of summarizes what we're doing. We are focused on raising capital and putting those dollars to work to get ourselves the most Bitcoin possible. So it's that's the way I look at it. One input to the equation and one output. It would be a bit more complicated if we were trying to factor in it could potentially, there's a bit more to consider if you're selling Bitcoin to pay for those expenses as well. And, that day very well may come. There could be constraints of the balance sheet at some point where we need the flexibility to put our Bitcoin to work growing our business, not necessarily just selling for the sake of it, but putting that Bitcoin to work growing our business. But, as of right now, it's about raising dollars and putting those dollars to work to drive Bitcoin-denominated revenue.
And is that how, maybe don't have to comment on it if you don't want, but is that how most of the public miners work? Like where it is a box and they put in dollars on one side and the profit is like in Bitcoin?
I think there's a varying amount of strategies out there. I would say in general, that's what a lot of companies are doing this year.
Yep.
What is, tailwinds to help that is that it's been a very strong Bitcoin market. That strategy is very difficult to employ in bear markets. You really, really have to be an efficient operator for that to work then. So the miners that have very low cost will be better positioned to do that. The miners with higher cost, they might be able to hold on to as much Bitcoin as possible now because the market's it's a bull market. There's a lot more money moving around. But if the tide turns, these markets tend to be cyclical, so we should anticipate it becomes difficult. But to finish your question, while I would say most are doing it, there is an array of different strategies. There are companies that are selling Bitcoin on a daily basis. They're selling all the Bitcoin they mine. There are some companies that are, selling just a discretionary amount here and there. But in general, Bitcoin mining companies, at least the publicly traded ones, are holding onto a lot of the Bitcoin, and I think that's having a very interesting effect on the supply of Bitcoin in the market.
So is Riot also a power producer then?
We are not a power producer. What we do is have relationships with major power companies. Bitcoin mining is the major input we take. We were talking about dollars, but the major input is really energy. Dollars purchase that energy, but the major input that drives consensus in Bitcoin is energy. So we have, through the expansion, through the execution of all our goals, we have built strong relationships with different power companies, utility transmission companies, management companies, and through them we are pulling in power and also selling power. So sometimes I talk about Riot as operating like a virtual power plant, but I mean that in the sense that we have purchased power and we own it, not that we necessarily generate it in our power company.
Got that. Do the power producers ever ask to be paid in Bitcoin?
Not as far as I'm aware. What miners are a real useful tool to energy grids because we're coming in there and finding points of the grid that need demand.
Yep.
Whether that energy is congested, it's surplus, transmission, whatever. Bitcoin miners come in and solve that problem. And the relationships we have to date, these are pretty large companies that maybe are orange pilled to the extent that they understand the relationship with Bitcoin miners and the value there, but maybe not orange pilled to the extent where they're like, we want Bitcoin only.
Yep.
I do believe that's part of the future though. Bitcoin is energy money, and no better party to understand that than a power generator.
Right. So what's going to happen when that day comes? What's going to happen to the account? I'm really interested in talking with more like corporate accountants about how the strategy of putting in dollars one side and then getting out Bitcoin on one side and how the accounting of that works. But then if in that future, when that happens and the power producers start to say, hey, can we get paid in the energy money? Are the same accounting softwares just going to transition simply over to that future, or what? What's going to happen? Yeah,
very interesting question. Not an accountant. I'm very lucky to have a very strong accountant. Her CFO understands this. Who could maybe speak on that with more authority. But so I can talk about the Bitcoin revenue portion. So the accounting for that is we're looking at the price of Bitcoin, the closing price of Bitcoin the day that Bitcoin is mined. So that kind of adds up over time. Then over a financial reporting period, a quarter or a year, we kind of have an average price that was used to drive revenues. And if you're doing that for expenses as well, you would need, I suppose you could kind of do something similar there. Although when most people are taking Bitcoin as an expense, as you're aware, they're looking at the market price of Bitcoin at that exact time, not necessarily the close of business day. So, it's really interesting to think about, because if you think about doing these expenses all denominated in Bitcoin, while they are very volatile relative to the dollar, you have, you could be spending, sometimes, your margins could be very high, sometimes they could be very low, even if the actual dollar amount was the same, just relative to what that traded value of Bitcoin would be, or equivalent value of Bitcoin would be. So, I couldn't, probably couldn't give you more detail on that, on how that accounting would work, but it's interesting to think about.
I think mining companies are, they're the only example I can think of that their income is denominated in Bitcoin. And so for that reason, I believe that the corporate accounting just tips, ways of it working, I think are going to come out of these mining companies and out of the energy companies that end up working with them. And then I'm anticipating kind of chunking that down the path of, again, I'm a personal finance nerd and love thinking about that all the time. I love seeing the professional athletes tweet out pay me in Bitcoin. It just it feels like the hyper Bitcoinization is happening. I'm excited about, I just think there's a very good amount of corporate kind of boardroom conversations that are happening right now about, dude, what is this thing doing? And how are we treating this? And if there's hiccups on how it's being treated on balance sheets, let's go out there and fix that. If not us, who else is gonna, sit there and fix that? Yeah,
so grateful that, industry leaders like Michael Saylor are trying to, I'm sure you're familiar with some of the accounting guidance around holding Bitcoin on a GAAP balance sheet right now. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. We take that Bitcoin at the, it's marked at the price I talked about, the closing price of the day it was mined. We hold it at that price. And then if the average price of Bitcoin goes down in the next reporting period, we have to impair that down. But if the price of Bitcoin ever goes up, we don't take a gain. So what you have is a balance sheet that might have, 3,000 Bitcoin valued at, let's just say $100 million, but the market value of that Bitcoin, could be close to double that.
Sure.
So it makes it, a little bit difficult I think for some people to initially understand, they need to see the Bitcoin denominated balances as well, the Bitcoin denominated revenue, because the actual value of that is floating alongside the market price of Bitcoin. And what's interesting to think about, stepping back a little bit to your question about, for example, power generators pricing in Bitcoin, I think it would be interesting if someone had enough forward-looking belief in Bitcoin that they would price that energy in Bitcoin. Maybe that's what you were kind of getting at. If you were to say okay, right now, this is maybe the market value of, this is the Bitcoin equivalent of the dollars that I would sell this at, but I am going to enter an agreement at this Bitcoin price because my time preference is such that I believe that's going to pay off more in the future.
Yeah.
Now, that is taking a big risk, but if you are a company, and we're talking about energy providers, it could be any type of service provider. If you were willing to take that forward-looking bet because you had that long-term view of Bitcoin, that could be pay off in a big way.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm coming at it from the world that I'm most familiar with is kind of just the coffee shop or the restaurant, dipping its toe in and kind of, continuing to price their items in dollars and then just accepting the remittance in Bitcoin, which is still a huge, giant step. And feels awesome.
You and I are at Next Burger, every month or so.
Yes.
Doing that very.
Next Burger, right here in town, in Orange County, in Newport. People that are here, they also have a Downey and an Orange location. And we're just in Austin. Seeing all the businesses there are cool. The tickets for the Christmas party tonight were sold in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So, no, all of that is awesome. How has your work at Riot and seeing the finances here, how has it impacted the way you personally think about Bitcoin or your personal budget?
I would say that the way Riot handles taking in Bitcoin and manages Bitcoin on its balance sheet lately has been very similar to how I do it personally, which makes my professional life feel very aligned with my personal life. Is I have, worked to buy Bitcoin over time, and I am not interested in selling it because of the longer time preference. If my personal and professional strategy were a bit different, I think I would probably feel this internal conflict all the time. It might be a little bit different, but I'm just so fortunate from that regard that a company has the liquidity, has the ability to run financing such that it can continue to do that. So I would say that between my personal and corporate life, pretty similar the way things are operating.
So what are the steps that we need to solve the kind of impairment treatment?
So I think a great initial step that was kind of led by Saylor was making I think it was a letter to the board in charge of this accounting treatment and solicited comments from the industry. While that may sound boring to a lot of people, I think that's the most effective way.
Yeah.
Regulators, they ultimately answer to the people they are regulating, and if they are getting the input over and over again, they can kind of see that. I think a lot of this stems still from the infancy of this industry, maybe. I'm just guessing, but I would guess that treatment comes from the fact that whatever person or group of people determined that the accounting treatment should be handled that way thought that Bitcoin's a volatile asset, it's probably going to go down, so doesn't really make sense to be marking to market every quarter. So this is how we're going to handle it. But the more track record that Bitcoin has of being successful, I think the more it enforces a long-term outlook from a regulator standpoint. People say all the time, and it's very true, every day Bitcoin exists, it makes Bitcoin that one day stronger.
So it seems like a natural next step for the power producers to start using it. What other industries do you think, or what other companies could kind of dovetail in? As Bitcoin continues to grow and grow, what other companies do you anticipate starting to use Bitcoin?
Well, the next major expense you see with Bitcoin mining is purchasing miners. Those companies, as far as I'm aware, at scale, do not take Bitcoin payments. Maybe some of them, sometimes on small scale, but in general, you can't buy $100 million worth of miners with Bitcoin. Yep. And I think the challenge from them comes from the expense they have to the semiconductor foundry, who they've committed to pay a certain amount of dollars for. Yep. So if they're selling $1 billion worth of equipment, they're on the hook with TSMC for whatever. It's a big risk to take a bet on Bitcoin. A risk I would generally support, but understand there's treasury management that's needed. So with that all being said, I think the next step could logically be for chip foundries to be interested in taking Bitcoin. That might be a somewhat uphill battle. They're not as directly connected to the Bitcoin industry as a power company maybe, or a miner manufacturer. That's the first one that comes to mind. Beyond that, I would say the next level that makes sense is the people. Yep. Bitcoin mining is a people business. That doesn't always make sense to people because what they think about is buildings full of miners as far as I can see. But putting that all together requires a tremendous amount of committed people. So to me, the logical next step is people taking in Bitcoin instead of dollars.
Yeah, love that. All right, wrap-up question that I want to do better at asking every guest is, what Bitcoin app doesn't exist that you wish existed? Or what Bitcoin service?
So I don't think about this for myself necessarily. I'm pretty comfortable with how I use Bitcoin, store Bitcoin, etc. One thing that kills me is seeing new people come into the space and not necessarily knowing or being capable of custodying their Bitcoin for themselves, appreciating the full properties of self-sovereign finance. Most people buy Bitcoin and it sits on an exchange, something like, there's hardware wallets out there that I think are tremendous tools, but to some people, it's just not all the way there for them to, maybe they can figure out how to use it, but use it properly. So what I'm always interested in is some type of custody solution that allows the common, less technically inclined person to realize that sovereign property of Bitcoin without being at risk of hacked or losing a seed phrase or something like that. So I don't know what that looks like. Something very consumer friendly, which is often at odds with the concept of self-sovereignty, but something consumer-friendly that gives people that property. And I don't know how that works. I don't know how that looks, but that's what I would love to see. I would love to orange pill someone and tell them, this is the way you should hold your Bitcoin. It's going to be easy, trust me.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Love that. Tell people your Twitter and any closing statements on Riot.
Sure. My Twitter is @JasonLess_. That's JasonLes_. Once again on Riot, I can't emphasize enough, we're a Bitcoin company. Oftentimes we're out there in the market speaking with lots of participants, why aren't you mining this? Are you interested in this? No, we're interested in Bitcoin. I'm not saying that everything else is awful, but we look at Bitcoin as a transformative tool that is going to change the way people think about how they store wealth, is going to think about the way they move their wealth. And that's the future that we're trying to support. We're supporting that future through proof of work mining. We're driving the Bitcoin blockchain forward. We're driving security for the Bitcoin blockchain. And we're doing that right here in the United States alongside where so much Bitcoin adoption is taking place. Fundamental kind of idea that we've had, and we've gotten just coincidental support from this from mining being banned from China. But we believe that consensus systems around Bitcoin mining should be located along the side where there is adoption. There's so much adoption in the United States, there should be more Bitcoin mining here, and there is as a result of, I think our efforts and companies like ours building here in the United States.
Hey all, this is Brian. You can reach me on Twitter @BrainHarrington. Shoot me a DM with any feedback from today's episode. This has been a Choice App production. Bitcoin is becoming centric to personal finance, and we want to help you learn how to better engage with Bitcoin financial services. None of this is financial advice and is for education and entertainment only.